Hello, everyone. My name is Scott, and if we go to Google and we Google for Scott, it is me and the Scott toilet paper people. And those bastards have been one above me for a number of years. So if you enjoy this talk and you write a blog post about it, be sure to link the word Scott. Don't say some dude from Microsoft came to our, hey, we saw Scott, and he was great, because I need to get above Scott tissue. I am happy that I am above the Wikipedia page for Scott. I used to have a Wikipedia page. Anyone here have a Wikipedia page? I don't have a Wikipedia page anymore. I have a discussion page about why my Wikipedia page was deleted for being not notable. So I am notable in that I have no Wikipedia page, so thank you very much. I have a bunch of stuff to show you, and I'm going to spend most of my time not looking at slides. But I brought some slides with me to share. Don't tell anyone that I brought you these slides, because this is extremely secret stuff. No, I work at Microsoft. I work in open source, though, which makes it better. I do actually work in Portland, Oregon. I don't live or work in Seattle. I've never worked in Seattle. I've worked at Microsoft about 5 years now. I live outside the Redmond reality distortion field. And if you've ever seen Portlandia, any Portland people or Portlandia people, it is exactly like that. It's not a parody. It's a documentary. That is how Portland works. Very, very relaxed town. If you need some free-range chicken, come to Portland because it's awesome. So what I want to show you is some Azure stuff. But I'm not an evangelist. I'm not a Microsoft, what do you call them, DPE person. I don't care if you use Azure or not. If you don't, it's just more Azure for me. I work on Azure, and I work on ASP.NET and web tools and web standards. And I came to Microsoft to work in open source. And I said that I would leave when I had open sourced as much stuff as I could. 5 years ago, .NET was closed, Azure didn't exist, and Microsoft was eviler than anyone. Fast forward to today, Apple just invented time itself. VoIP. They invented VoIP 2 days ago, in case anyone had heard about that, which is pretty impressive stuff. Google is clearly evil. Facebook is completely evil. So we are now fourth in evil, which is good. The question is, did we become less evil, or were we just lapped by far more evil companies? You will have to decide. But Azure didn't exist, and one of the problems is that with Microsoft right now is that Microsoft killed your grandfather. And because we killed your grandfather, you killed my pappy. And then you don't know why you hate us, but you have like generational pain because we killed your grandfather, like back in the browser wars. I don't know what planet the browser wars happened on, but a long time ago in the browser wars, the more civilized age, we killed your grandfather. And because of all of that, and then we in the Azure team will do something awesome, and then some other group at Microsoft will sue Android for something. And then it's like, you 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. So I can't speak to any of all that crap. I don't represent Microsoft. I represent me and my team and the stuff that we're building that I think is cool. So let me talk a little bit about some internals of Azure and explain it, and then we'll spend the rest of the time at the command line. Cool? And because there's a small group of people here, if you want to stand up and just go, bullshit, feel free to do that. And we can have a nice chat about it, because I can tell you anything you want to know. Okay. At the base of Azure, there's this storage thing. Just like at the base of AWS, there's S3. Everything ultimately comes down to storage. So if you're going to stick something in Azure, whether it be a GIF, or whether it's a virtual machine hard drive or a multi-gigabyte blob, it's going to sit in Azure storage, and that sits on everything. So if I have a virtual hard drive and I stick it in storage, I can make it available via HTTP, and I can go and download it. I can take a GIF and stick it in Azure storage and then say, click the CDN button, and now that blob, which was available over HTTP, is now in a CDN. They're not in CDNs by default. And then if I wanted to, I could set up a virtual machine, mount the VHD, and then I've got a VM that's running in Azure. They show you all these different kinds of things, but I think the best way to look at it is like this. Azure has basically two main ways to do stuff. I'll show you both. But there's a third way that's confusing. The main way is IaaS, right? Virtual machines. You got a virtual machine, you can do anything you want to on it, including freaking Erlang. But virtual machines are like a puppy. You have to feed it and water it. I don't have any dogs, so I assume that you water the dog. You have to keep it alive, right? That's why I don't have animals or plants or anything alive in my house. And because of this, you apt-get upgrade, apt-get update, Windows update, all that stuff. It's care and feeding, right? I mean, I've got VMs that I haven't thought about in years, and then I roll in later, and it's like, oh, wow, Heartbleed. And then it's a whole thing, right? But total control. Then there's PaaS, Platform as a Service. You can do .NET, Node, PHP, Python, and we just added Java. And these are websites. They live in a virtual machine, they run in a virtual machine, except we manage the operating system updates. More specifically, you can't SSH, you can't shush. Anyone say that? Shush into a machine? I'm trying to make that a thing. So if you agree that you should shush into things, just use it in your casual conversation at work and see if it catches on, because I think it will catch on. You can't shush into these machines. Can't remote desktop into them. They are handled for you. And you might think, oh, that's a problem, but I'll show you why it's actually not a problem. Those are the main ways. Now, here's the kind of the other secret way, and pay attention to the curly braces there. Cloud applications are an Azure-specific thing. This is vendor lock-in, right? And every cloud has one of these things, right? Every cloud has the like, hey, git push deploy, woohoo! And every cloud has the, hey, make a virtual machine, woohoo! And then they have the vendor lock-in thing. This is ours. And it describes a stateless virtual machine. It is a true virtual machine. You can shush into it. You can remote into it. You can do stuff with it. But it could go away at any moment. You don't want to write to its disk because literally the virtual machine could just poof. But we can fire them up because they're warm, and we can get them going, and then we run your setup script. It's kind of like a Docker type situation. Bring up a warm VM, set up your site, poof. You need 10 of those, bring the slider bar, save, go. But it's vendor lock-in because you're going to end up using our APIs and stuff like that. But it's a virtual machine where, again, we manage the updates. So for total control, don't want to deal with administrivia, welcome to vendor lock-in. It's totally fine. It's great. It's not a huge deal. But it is, I want to be straight with you. Another way to look at it, actually, which is a little bit clearer, is like this. So virtual machines are like owning your own home. Right? You have to deal with it, you have to replace the siding, and the house could break. It's ultimately your fault if the site goes down. If the VM is up, we've done our job. If the site goes down, you suck. The website's platform as a service, like renting a hotel room, like my hotel room, which I trashed last night in just like a one-man party. I am going to come back, and it's going to be left exactly like perfect, right? It's going to be reset. I can't mess up that run because it can just be reset. And then renting a room is a little bit really kind of more Airbnb, where it's like you could mess up their house, but there could be consequences, and you could be kicked out at any moment. So that's kind of a good way to think about it. Does that make sense? So we also call those worker roles. And then we have all of these other things, like every platform has, like a scheduler, and I'll talk about a little bit mobile services and stuff like that. You know, we've got Hadoop and all that kind of cool stuff. Now, people can run anything that they want, you know, even IronPython if you want, whatever. You can run Linux. Now, some people are like, why would you run Linux on our cloud like that? Well, we actually have recording stopped. Try recording again. I don't know when it popped that up. Could have been years ago. Finishing. Hey, hello. I'm just going to do it again, okay? That's really exciting for everyone to watch. Yeah. So seriously, though, that sounds like that's really not super awesome.
It's a screen thing, yeah.
Hit that button.
Click on that screen.
That's it?
Yeah.
That's exciting. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yay for us. Okay. No, it's okay. It is what it is. All right. So in Azure, this is the current portal. This is an HTML5 portal. There's no Silverlight or anything. Long time ago, it used to be Silverlight. Don't worry about that. It's dead. I'm going to zoom in and stuff. It's pretty when it's on a normal size monitor. Okay, just assume it's going to look like crap. Okay. And I can go in here and I sign up for an Azure. You put in your credit card and we give you $200 for the first month. And then at the end of it, we shut all your stuff down if you decide that you don't want to do it. And we're not going to charge you if you don't want to be charged. And I say, new compute, and I can say website or virtual machine. And I can say quick create, but I'm going to say from gallery. And over here, we've got this gallery of images. There's the usual Windows stuff. And there's things like Visual Studio if you wanted to run your dev stuff. We have people running their dev machines in the cloud, which is real common, actually. But we've also got Ubuntu. We've got CentOS and SUSE and the kind of stuff you'd expect. Also, we've added Puppet Enterprise stuff recently, which is cool. 20% of Azure is Linux. People don't realize. This is cool, but you can learn this stuff by Googling around and figuring it out. I don't want to show you stuff that you can learn by reading paperwork. If you go to virtual machines and go to images, there's a button down here at the bottom that says VM Depot. Microsoft, in order to start getting more involved in open source but not mess up the corporate stuff that doesn't allow open source, started another company called MS OpenTech. And when we work on GPL code and we do stuff in Linux and we don't want to cause any trouble, we just want it to be seamless, you work for OpenTech. You're either a vendored out to those guys, or we have full-time employees. And they have done a whole bunch of really cool stuff, including create this gallery of 1,000 virtual machines: Drupal, Ghost, GitLab, JBoss, Jenkins, LAMP, WAMP, MAP, Mean, all that stuff. These are all legit. We've also got all the Bitnami stuff, whatever Ruby stacks you want, whatever versions you want, ready to go. And then you can just make these VMs. It's really, really cool. So we could just make one. I think that probably the most important VM that we should probably work on would be Minecraft. So we'll just do a Minecraft in a box. I can pick my region. And then we'll just say, OK. And now it's going to go and copy that image over. Oops. Sorry, this resolution thing is a problem. OK, so while that's happening, let's get out of this universe and get into the command line, because you all look like you're some command line people. Is that OK, command line? All right? It's not like, I don't know, command line. No? OK.
Does that mean you look like command line?
I don't really know what I meant by that. Let me rephrase that. Let me dig myself out of this hole, sir. You look like a person who would appreciate a good command line. Is that better? You look like a guy who's discovered that HTOP is better than top. All right, good. Paparazzi. Follow me around. OK, so you go npm install Azure CLI --g. Okay? The Azure CLI is written in Node, and if you type Azure, then you get this cloud platform deal. And the general structure of it is Azure, noun, verb. I think Azure is superior to other clouds because of the programmability and the dev tools, and this is one of the things that stands out. So Azure, noun, verb. Azure VM list. So those are my VMs. Now, notice that it's wrapping. Assume that it would not wrap at a weird resolution, OK? Azure VM list -- JSON. So let's see here. Here's a Mongo endpoint on one of my machines. I get all the details of my IPs. Notice remember how I talked about storage, how storage is a blob. This is not necessarily publicly accessible, even though it has a URL, because I haven't clicked public. But I want to give you that sense of how these layers build on. We've mounted that disk. That's a 5 gig MySQL data disk. Okay? So you've got all this information. I can say Azure site list. And then these are my websites. We'll spend some time making these. Now, if we get out of full screen and switch over to a different area here, we've got storage, and in my storage account is some containers, just like S3. I've got one here I called example. I think I have another one called blog that has stuff in it. There we go. So I've got some stuff in here. Here's a high-res picture. I didn't want to host it on my blog because it's like 30 megs or something. It's like a 40 megapixel picture, right? So I just threw it up there. We do this kind of stuff, right? We throw our things up on S3 or whatever. I can do that in a number of different tools or with this command line. So here I'm saying Azure Storage, remember Azure noun, and I'm going to act on a blob, that's like a subnoun, download. The container is called blog. It's unfortunate that I've got blob and blog. Blob is a thing in Azure. Blog is just what I happen to call the container. And then I'm just going to download the name of that file, right? And then when I go and do that, it'll go and say, you want to override? I already downloaded it. And that file, actually, I think it's over here, is hella big. This is like, it's one of those 41 megapixel phones. So I took it from far away to see what that would look like. And I think it's a pretty good size file. 10 megs, so 10 meg JPEG, right? Non-trivially sized. So I can access those blobs. I can list the blobs out, Azure blob storage. I'm assuming, this is me just guessing, and that's the nice thing about the command line. It's pretty easy like that. I should be able to go like this. There you go. So here I've got my different JS files, my GIFs, and my stuff like that. Now, storage is not in a virtual machine. It's not in a website. So we know that when we're building stuff at cloud scale, we put a website up, and that website's going to take video input, or it's going to take uploaded user images. You're not going to want to put those on the disk, right? Because that could go away. You put them in blob storage. So if you wanted to do that with a Node site or a Ruby site or whatever, we've got SDKs for all of that. So if I go up to GitHub Azure, everything's on GitHub, everything's open source. All of the SDKs are open source. And we've got frameworks and projects for basically anything that you could want. So here's .NET, PHP, Python, Ruby. I could say here I want to get storage or blobs or tables or whatever. So then if you've got a Node site that's taking user input, it's just a matter of dropping out one piece of functionality and dropping in this one here. And you can go and abstract these things away to avoid vendor lock-in, because you could basically have it a config option. Put S3, S3 goes down, switch it to Azure. And we have people who do that. If you're really serious about uptime, you'll have multiple clouds or you'll have multiple regions. I'll show you some things we do on global failover as well. So I can do basically any Linux thing that I want. I can do basically any language that I want. And no one has noticed yet. So hopefully they'll let us continue this. If I go to virtual machines, these two virtual machines are currently running. And there's nothing here that will tell you that one is Linux and that one is Windows. Azure doesn't discriminate. It doesn't even know. It just knows that it's running something in this hypervisor. Okay? I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, that this is real, by the way. This is not like, I don't get free Azure time. I don't have an unlimited account. This is my actual life. I run 18 sites up here. That's my real stuff. And there's a little warning here that says that I just ran out of money. So you have a warning at the top. Like the big fear is that you're going to give them your credit card, go to sleep, and then wake up and owe $1,000, right? Just like AT&T, they're going to have like a warning, and they'll tell you how much money you're spending per day, what the burn down rate is, and that thing was green, and then it turns yellow, and then it turns red when you start costing money. And then if I go down here, see, it's actually telling me I'm using an average of $7 a day. That make sense? So this one is a Windows one. I can hit connect, and even though I'm on a Mac, I've got remote desktop. And this is a thing that a lot of people do with, I've seen people use actually iPads as a really good iOS Azure front end. You can manipulate your virtual machines and then develop remotely. or you can use, rather than running parallels on an air, just go up here and do it this way, and you can give the thing as much power as you want. So this is that Windows machine working very nicely. And if I go in here, you'll see there's that 5 gig drive that I talked about a minute ago. Now, this isn't Azure specific, but this is interesting, I think, from a cloud perspective. This was slow originally because I made a new Windows VM, I installed MySQL, and I was like, Azure sucks, this is slow, what's going on? Well, it turns out I'd put my database on the C drive, which is the same place as the operating system. It's an obvious mistake, but it's just one of those kind of like things that you do when you're learning a new platform. So, in a cloud, there's this notion of IOPS, right? It's the number of operations per second. You get 500 ops per second per disk. So I can have multiple disks. So it doesn't cost me anymore to make a new disk. So I made a new disk, I moved the SQL database over to that disk, doubling my throughput, no additional cost. The size of your VM has a max number of attached disks. So smalls get 2, mediums get 4, 8, 16. So a large VM can have 16 times 500 IOPS, up to 8,000 IOPS, which is a pretty competitive number. And then you just shard your data across that, whether it be GIFs or Mongo or MySQL or whatever. Again, not specific to Azure, but an interesting thing in the way they set it up is just add, attach disk. So I could actually minimize this remote desktop session, keep it running, and go down here, click on that virtual machine, and I do realize it's not crystal clear because of the size of the screen, and just say attach empty disk or attach disk. Also completely from the command line or via Puppet or via whatever you want to do. So all of this automated. We've got lots of people who have done these SDKs themselves. They've done it with PowerShell or Bash scripts or Puppet or Chef or whatever you want to do. We've got that. It's not a closed system. No one's got Visual Studio here. It's legit. Here's my dashboard showing my CPU. Now this one is a Linux VM. I know that just because I know that. So if I go, I believe it's, I need to check the port because I put the endpoint. There's port 80. Here's the SSH is on 22, so it's actually 52714. I can set that myself. I just stuck it somewhere else. Hanselman, sendy.cloudapp.net port 52714. Was that right? L. Scott? Okay, so that's that machine. Now, a lot of times when people do stuff in the cloud, they go to the pricing slider deal, right? And they go, well, Fred's got a 4 gig machine under his desk, so we're going to need one similar in Azure or in Amazon. And they move the slider bar, and they go, $200, Microsoft, you suck. And then that's the end of your relationship with us. But what they don't think about is what exactly does that machine run? And they don't think about server density. I run a whole series of blog posts called Penny Pinching in the Cloud. Everybody on every platform is spending more money than they need to, whether it be Amazon or whether it be Azure, because they're trying to give more headroom than is necessary. This is one VM running one app, okay? This app at peak uses about 150 megs. It's a PHP newsletter application, right? Just because it runs on a 1 gig RAM machine under Fred's desk doesn't mean I need a machine like that. So I'm running this on an extra small VM, $7 a month. But once a month, I send out a newsletter to 10,000 people. So that's a problem, right? I need it to run because it needs to handle the links and the reporting and stuff like that. So what do? Is I can go into Configure, and 1 day a month, scale it up. I can go from a shared core and a tiny amount of RAM all the way up to 8 cores and 56 gigs of RAM. Shut it down, reboot, and I've got a new machine. It's literally that easy. But I can do that at the command line too. Azure, VM, scale, yada, 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 okay? We've also got an interesting idea here. Some problems are CPU problems, while A5 is obviously not a CPU problem, it's a memory problem. So if you're going to run your own Redis, that's cheaper than that. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of diversity in the different VMs that you get to run. Additionally, here's another little secret on saving money. Standard VMs allow you to do things like auto-scale. You can go and make web farms and load balance them. But if you just need a singular instance, then you just make a basic VM. You'll get a dynamic IP address, but you'll get a DNS to look it up. You'll save a couple of bucks a month, but you don't get the auto-scale. So Yeah, so you would want to find out what the total working set. So like I was in HTOP right there. If I switched back over to the Windows one, where did it go?
I mean, the same as a VM anywhere.
A VM to VM, right. The point I'm making is that too many people have these 2 and 4 gig VMs that they're paying $100 a month for and complaining about how this cloud provider is expensive. When the fact is, you want 1 VM per app. I think people will go and say, well, we have enough money to buy a 4 gig VM and then we'll shove 5 apps on that, and that's density. No, density is eating the server OS overhead, making 1 VM per app and then scaling that appropriately. And then also remembering that you can scale out more than you can scale up. Scaling out's really, really easy, and I'll show you that. That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. So if I go into the dashboard, I can do auto scale. And auto scale is exactly what you think it is. You can go and say, if my CPU gets above 20%, I need X number of VMs, have a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 10 at all times. And then when your CPU is below this threshold for more than 20 minutes, clearly no one's coming back, shut it down. Or you can do it on a schedule. On the weekdays, have 2 VMs. On the weekends, have 1 extra small. Or you can script those. So if you don't find our rules to work, script them yourself. Does that make sense? Now, this might be interesting. I'll show you something I haven't shown before. Let's see if this actually works. This is totally, there wasn't really a script, but let's go off script, shall we? This is my startup. We're at Microsoft, we have a very liberal moonlighting rules. You can do whatever the hell you want as long as it doesn't compete. So I like my iPhone, and I like dictation. I think it's really awesome. So I also use Windows as my primary OS, and I think that having that dictation on Windows would be really awesome. So I made this iOS app. This is written in C# using Xamarin, and I'm going to point it at this QR code. And on the right-hand side there, it says My Echo just joined. Now it says Scott's iPhone just joined. And basically then I just start talking into Siri, comma, and say stuff. Basically, I talk into Siri and say things. Now, I've only got 1 bar of LTE. I apologize. But you get the idea. The point I'm making is that I can dictate full-length emails with punctuation and then send them up into the cloud and then down into Windows, into whatever the current app is, because Windows voice dictation sucks. So I'm basically bringing Mavericks and iOS level voice dictation into Windows for $2. So let's talk about the back end. Is that cool? Sorry, that didn't work with my one bar here. I've got customers all over the world. So what I did was I set up websites because I didn't want to deal with virtual machines. And I've got West Europe, Southeast Asia, and North Central, and those are websites. Let's make a website, and then we'll talk about how we scaled those. When is this talk over? I don't want to go over. 2:45, I got 15 minutes. Okay, good. So let's do this. I'm going to say, the command line here will say express super poopy. So now we have a site called super poopy. Because then I know I will delete it. Because you don't want to leave that kind of stuff lying around. Now, I use, when I do, you guys know about Git and gitignore files and stuff? So there's this great website called gitignore.io, and you can just type in what you need a gitignore for, and then they'll generate it. That's kind of cool. So what I did is I made a gitignore function and so I just typed gi node, and then it will go and get that file, and then I just pipe that to .gitignore, and oops. And there it is right there, right? Because I want to put this in Git. So now, Azure site create super poopy 99, because there could be other super poopies, we don't know. Location, I'll put it in the West US, --git. So it's going to make a site up in Azure. It's going to find the locations. I said West US, creating a new website at that location. So the VM's warm already. It's firing that up. It called git init. Notice that I'm doing Node and made a YAML file to support my Azure stuff and made a remote. So if I say git remote show, there's one called Azure. Okay? You guys with me so far? Some people might not care about this. I don't know. So now let's go over into the websites and find that particular website and see what it's doing right now. It's probably just a nothing website. These hotel Wi-Fi things are always a trouble when doing cloud demos. Okay, so here's super poopy and it's not doing anything. I click on deployments. Nothing's ever deployed, and it's telling me, like, your Git repository is ready. Okay, git add, git commit. I can't see what I'm doing. Awesome. Git push Azure master. So that's pushing to a Git repository up in Azure. And notice that even though I walked away, it immediately noticed it happening on the side there. And now it says remote : that's the remote. Coming back from Azure, it's calling npm install, because remember I excluded node modules when I brought in the gitignore file. So it's going and getting that stuff, writing the deployment command. You can write your deployment scripts in batch, PowerShell, Python, or shell scripts. So if you don't like our shell script, you want to go and call Bower or do some funky thing, you can do that if it makes you happy. That's happening on the server side. It's all asynchronous, so of course I could still run around and do other stuff if I wanted to in the website. The website's not like blocked or anything. I could go and look at other things and then switch back. So active deployment. Let's see if that came up, because it looked like it may have blocked in that. There you go. So there's my Express site. Okay? And this looks like it got angry at some point. So now I can go to, say, deployments. I can click on the deployment, look at the logs. I can see who deployed it. If I deploy it a second time, I won't do this to waste your time, but I can have multiple deployments. I can then have the oh shit button and say redeploy that one and put it back the way I wanted it to. But sometimes people say that they don't have enough control. What you can do is a little interesting trick. You can grab this Git repo URL here. Okay? It is the same URL as the site, except it adds SCM, which makes sense if you think about it. And I'm going to visit that as if it were a website. And you get this debug console. Where did it go? There it is. Sorry, I'm struggling with the size of the screen, so that's why I'm moving around so much. So here I can go and click environment, see the environment, see the directories, see the environment variables, ask those kinds of hard questions that you typically ask when I sent it into the black box and it doesn't work, right? Then I can even go and say debug console and go like this, and now I've got an HTML console and I'm on the Azure virtual machine looking at my Git log files or my SSH keys or whatever I want to see, and I can actually look in the root folder and see, is that really my YAML file? Is that correct? And could I maybe make a change to that? Does that make sense? Even go and say, look at Process Explorer, and then take a look at, like, am I sure that I got the right node version? Maybe I want to pin a different one. What does that have open? Does it have specific handles open? What's it looking at? What DLLs got loaded into memory and all that kind of stuff? That's cool, but it's not deeply cool. It's almost kind of like hacky cool. What I could do is go to Configure. And here I want to just point out that if I was running, I can pick PHP versions and Java versions and all that kind of stuff. Turn WebSockets on or off. I'm going to say Edit in Visual Studio Online. And what we've done is we've got a version of Visual Studio that's written in about 200,000 lines of JavaScript. It's actually written in TypeScript because large-scale systems kind of get a little complicated, somewhere around 200,000 lines. But I can go like this, and again on a Mac, certainly on Chrome. Now wait, see how it just popped and now it's color-coded? This will take a moment, the module loading there, right? So this is full IntelliSense, full evaluation, and smart evaluation, not cheesy evaluation. I can go and say var poo equals Scott poo dot, and it knows it's a string. But then I could go and say 1 and say poo dot, and now it knows it's a number. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's not autocomplete, with all due respect to Sublime users and stuff. I typed it before auto-completion is not like IntelliSense. So we try to give you a logical thing. If you're using Angular and you're going to want to know what could potentially happen. So what we're doing is we're actually running the thing and then giving you what we think the types are. So that's kind of cool. This is all in the browser. We've got syntax highlighting for Jade. We've got the ability to open a console next to it and run Git and run ls and poke around and do stuff. So you do your dev here, you're not editing production, and then push out there. So it's similar to some of the cloud-based things that you're doing. I don't know if it's necessarily something I would want to do full-time on this thing here, but it's getting to that point. But if you need to make a quick change and all you have is your iPad, we got that too. That is a non-trivial amount of work, and we've got syntax highlighting for everything. We'll even do diffs, split screening. We've got color swatches for CSS, all the kind of stuff that you'd expect in IDE. So you can tell that they are basically starting to rewrite Visual Studio in JavaScript, it looks like, doesn't it? Here's a diff between two files that are totally not appropriate to be diffing between each other. But I just picked two random things to diff them, right? But the point is that this is really sophisticated, and it's all built in. You don't pay extra for it, so that's kind of cool. And for Node people particularly, it's very, very attractive thing. Now, we did those. Back to my little startup. These are the WebSockets hubs that act as the router for those things, right? And these are websites, and I have made them run on their own individual virtual machines. Now, this is where the line blurs a little bit. You get 10 free websites when you sign up. If you sign up and you never pay Microsoft ever, you get 10 free websites per region. There's 7 regions. You get 70 websites. So for dicking around is free. What you have to pay for is like, oh, well, now I want to put a domain on that. Or now I want SSL. But for the little kind of like, hey, goofing around, I made a demo, it'll be whatever name of your site is, .azurewebsites.net. Free is free. Shared is exactly what it sounds like. You're on a shared core. Basic is no CPU scaling, no automatic scaling. And standard is there's really an actual virtual machine underneath you. So these routers for my little startup have these choices. 1 core, 2 gigs, 2 cores, 4 gigs, and 4 cores, 7 gigs. And then I can turn on, auto scale if I wanted to. I can also see like my resources. I get 50 gigs of file system storage, so you could do crazy stuff. Like if you're not doing real scale out, you want to just scale up, yeah, you can write to disk. I mean, we're not going to delete your disk. It's not going to disappear out from underneath you. It's not going to scale, but it could work, okay? Now, here's the interesting part. Notice that my URL is like some weird URL .azurewebsites. I've gone and hooked up my custom CNAME. Because My Echo is the name of the product, My Echo app. If I put hub.myechoapp, now if I turned on Skype and called a friend in Europe, they would get the West Europe. If I called a friend in Australia, he would get Asia. Traffic Manager is how we do that, and it is like this. I've created a traffic manager, and I can say, how do I want this to treat an endpoint? Do I want to do round robin, fail over, where everything's fine until it goes down and then it hops to another one, or performance? And performance is basically keeping track of the ping speeds and picking the fastest one, right? And there's a static table that's updated like many times a day. It's not dynamic, so the user doesn't have to wait for it. And then I set up endpoints where, in this case, an endpoint can be either a virtual machine or a website. So these endpoints are 3 different websites. Here they are. And I would just say add. Now it's loading my endpoints. Do I want a cloud service, a website? Okay, I'm going to add this site to the partnership. Make sense? So then I wrote a script to do multiple remotes, because I know the remotes, right, the name of the GitHub URL, the Git URL, and I just said git push Azure Asia, Azure Europe, Azure North, and I have one thing, and I just go push, 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 and no config, because I automatically just look at the environment variables to figure out whether I'm in Europe or whether I'm in Asia, and then it just works. So then I can just go and say deploy.bat or .shush, and it just works, and that's cool. That has enabled me to scale regions independently, keeping one URL, and then my iOS app just says hub dot, and it automatically works. Now this portal here is the current portal, and one other thing I want to show you, we've got about 4 minutes left. If I say compute website, custom create, I can say publish from source control. And I'll say super, super poopy, and I'll put it in the West US free. I can do a local Git, GitHub, Dropbox, scary but true. Seriously, designers freaking love this. Just give it to a designer, they make some static files, you stick it in Dropbox, and it shows up on Azure. Bitbucket, Codeplex, whatever. So if I hit GitHub, check this out. It prompts me to log into GitHub. Now it's going to go and use two-factor auth, just because I have two-factor auth turned on. So let me just do that real quick. And it's going to actually pull out the names of all of my repos at GitHub. But retrieving your repositories. It'll set up the webhook for us. So for all my little open source examples, I just go and pick the branch, pick the repository, and say go. And then when a new pull request comes in, I hit pull and it's done. So for free stuff, or all your Angular demos and all of your galleries and things that you do, that your throwaway apps, I have a crap load of free sites, and I go bananas with them. Now this is the current portal. We're updating it. This is a preview portal. It's just a concept, okay? And it's a little crazy, so you make like, ooh. This is more like a DevOps portal, okay? And it's almost an operating system of its own. Everything's asynchronous, everything's HTML5, and I have customized the dashboard. So I can right-click, say customize, change the sizes of these things, drag them around, and lay out a dashboard that I could then put in my lobby of my office that would describe what's going on with my different things. One of the things that I was concerned about if I say browse websites was that my podcast website was costing me too much money. I couldn't figure out why. But I can go into that, and these are like blades that open up. And then as you're done, then they back out, okay? I can go in here, I can see analytics, requests and errors, sessions in the browser, file system storage, estimated spend. Right-click, pin. So now I have my current billing, estimated spend for my startup. My dictation app's costing me $42 a month right now for 3 VMs and all those different locations. I've got my podcast now costs me $7, and then my newsletter, the one I showed you with the SSH into the Linux box, that was $7. Each of these is totally configurable. I can right-click, customize, resize, but I can also click on them directly, then go into an Explorer and see the exact metrics. So I can see exactly how many Chrome people hit, change those queries, customize those charts, and then repin the new instance of the default chart. Does that make sense? See, they're all live charts. And I can go and say edit chart, add an alert, and say, text me when the number of Chrome users drops below a certain. I don't know what the hell I would want to do, but you get the idea. Also, we have things like pingdom and all that kind of stuff all built in. We've got partnerships, so anything that you think we haven't got, we have partnerships like Mongo Labs we've got. We have New Relic integration. So whatever makes you happy, we've got a lot of that kind of stuff. Any questions in the last few minutes? Thanks for putting up with me, by the way. That's very nice of you guys. Any questions? Sir?
Can you show how to get to the logs again?
Yeah, so if you have a site that has some name like, let's just say super poopy, you would just add .scm in the middle and then log in with your same, the same credentials you use to push the site. And then you can go and say debug console and then go into the console, and then the console at the bottom is synchronized with the Explorer at the top. So as I click there, it actually changed the directory. So then I can go and see, here's my Git logs. That's one way to do it. Another way is I could say, here, let's try this. Azure site log tail, I think it's called, actually, is it logging tests? Azure site log tail logging test. Logging test is the name of a site that I've got running. This is going to execute a tail command remotely and attach to a site. And then if I go and hit that site, I'm connected to the log streaming service. I'll hit that Azure site. All of my console logs will come out here. So there I'm hitting the site now on the right, and the logging service is showing the error on the left. I could also type Azure site log download. It would zip them all up and then hand them to me. So you got a lot of choices. In this case, I've deployed a Node site or an Azure or any site even to production, and it acts different than it did locally. Live log streaming connected. Again, everything we've been doing is on a Mac. But if I want to do later analysis, I could actually configure the logs to go into Azure storage and then bring down gigabytes of data and then chew on that at a later date, or use New Relic or someone like that. That's a good question. Thanks. Anything else? Yeah.
We're going across an instance where we're using, and you didn't show this, but using Git technology with Visual Studio Online. And if you got a simple node site or something, trying to use Git to push that up, getting the continuous build to push out without running it through a Visual Studio solution. Do you know?
What do you mean?
Well, if you push it up without it having a build file or using build, it won't automatically.
What kind of thing were you sending? An ASP.NET or a Node or what?
No, a simple HTML site, like a static site.
So when you push a static site, or like I did an Express site, if it sees that it's a Node site, it'll run npm install. If it sees that it's a ASP.NET site, it'll build it. If it sees it's a PHP site, it'll tell you to stop using PHP. But it needs to be in a state where it can, get itself working. If you need to do something custom, like run Grunt or Bower or whatever, you can do one of two things. You can run that locally, put that over into its own repo, and then push that. So you're pushing it in a state where the build has occurred. So you have to ask yourself, do I want the build to happen locally, on a build server, or in Azure? In the instance I gave you, it built in Azure. I pushed git source up there, it built. Or I can run the build locally, then stage it, and then upload it, FTP, Git, whatever. Or I can go and type Azure Site Deployment Script, and it'll spit out the deployment script that we used. So if there's a step you needed, you can actually go and say Azure Site Deployment. We'll give you the script, you edit it, and if a deploy.sh lives in that file, then you've got your own, and you can basically customize it. The system is called Kudu, K-U-D-U. It's open source, it's on GitHub, you can run it locally if you want. And then you write your own shell script. You can say, I need my Bower stuff to happen here, and I need my NPM to happen there, and don't forget to delete that thing. And it'll run just the same. So maybe one of those. If you have trouble, email me. Good questions. Anybody else? Thank you very much for hanging out. I really appreciate it.